But I just wanted to take you back to my first job as an impressionable young staff auditor with a Big Four firm. At that time, I was just eager to learn the ropes, and I quickly learned that working long hours, those lunch conversations were an important part of the bonding with clients and colleagues. And then there was often breakfast and dinner too when it was out of town. But working primarily with men at the time, those conversations seemed to center around spectator sports then. And I was not that tuned in to those types of conversations. And then there was a real or imagined kind of pressure to learn and be good at golf. So there's a double ugh, if you will. So having little interest in spectator sports and even less in playing golf, I felt like the social deck was stacked against me. It was a little bit harder to connect. I often felt like my teammates were speaking a different language. While I made an effort to follow some teams and I learned to be pretty decent with a set of Callaway clubs, this experience heightened my sensitivity and advocacy toward inclusiveness going forward. 4 years ago, I was invited to attend an NCACPA Professional Women's Conference. And honestly, I was a little conflicted about the idea of going to a women-centered event after having spent most of my life avoiding drawing gender lines and basically just having an opinion that was greatly influenced by that first career experience. After all, isn't it, don't men need to have a conference too? And, what message would that send to men? I had a husband and a son, and so, but I went to the conference to see what it was all about. And interestingly, I found that there was a different kind of cadence and energy level there that I'd seen at previous gender neutral conferences. I enjoyed the free-flowing, uninhibited conversations around topics like how to be assertive without being perceived as aggressive, owning your worth as a woman, and negotiating like a man, how your clothes affect your salary and promotions, and all kinds of other topics. It was not only what was shared, but how it was shared that was interesting to me. Everyone seemed so open, so spirited, uninhibited, and while at times frustrated, mostly just motivated and joyous. So I left that conference convinced that conferences like that and similar ones to empower women do serve an important purpose. Many of the attendees who are struggling with those topics that they shared on varying levels would not have shared them the same way in a traditional gender neutral environment. They would have been afraid of being perceived a different way by men who may not be sensitive to her different life challenges. Obviously, while some men can be more effective than some women in relating to women's challenges, it does take a little effort to understand the other perspective, as anyone who's been married can attest. So I left that conference with several impressions when it comes to empowering women. First, efforts to empower women do not minimize men in any way. Second, both men and women benefit from recognizing and supporting initiatives to help her growth. And then third, more education and richer conversations are foundational in efforts to empower women. So while we more regularly see efforts to help women in their careers emerge today, with some definite measures of success from them, her financial empowerment is another story. Financial services is an area that often struggles to meet the needs of many women. While research shows that financial literacy gap between women and men is more about confidence than ability or knowledge, that's an important point, women often have taken a backseat to investing in financial planning. And one factor related to this is that investing is really second only to professional sports and to being male dominated. Women only make up 16% of advisors, 10% of mutual fund managers, and 23% of CFPs. And as clients, about 70% of women leave their family financial advisor within a year after the death of a spouse. Clearly, there's more to be done in helping her get what she wants and needs through financial empowerment. So what makes empowerment so critical for her and why now? Well, let's start by talking about the savings shortfall in our country today. Did you know that 4 in 10 adults would either borrow, sell something, or not be able to pay if faced with a $400 emergency expense? Did you know the average middle-class family has only 3 weeks of reserves? and that 1 in 5 adults can't cover their current month's bills, and 1 in 4 skipped a medical emergency in the past year due to an inability to pay. Then what does this saving shortfall look like in retirement? When the paychecks stop coming, but inflation, taxes, and market downs continue. Well, the stats tell the story here too. About 30% of seniors 55 and older don't have a retirement account or a pension. Even seniors 55 to 64 with retirement savings only have average savings of around $104,000. And seniors ages 62 to 69 only have average assets of around $39,000. So this paints a picture of the savings crisis facing us today. Actually, a lot of people are calling it her crisis, now worsened through COVID. Many people are actually calling the COVID recession a she-cession because it's further widening chasms in areas where she was already experiencing challenges. There are actually 3 additional formidable obstacles to her being able to maintain that desired lifestyle in retirement. And you see them here. There's a gap with her compensation, debt, and investing. She has caregiving demands and then longevity challenges that all exacerbate a lot of the statistics I shared with you before that everyone faces. So the compensation, debt, and investing gaps are very real. And while progress is being made, women still earn 79 cents for every dollar that a man earns. Those lower career earnings lead to less retirement income from retirement plans and Social Security benefits. It also means less money to pay down student debt, of which, surprisingly, 2/3 is held by women. And on top of this, although studies have demonstrated women often achieve better performance than men in investing, they're more reticent to do so. They often leave their money in cash on the side, consistently feeling that they just need to know more before investing. Then there's the caregiving. The impact of caregiving is far greater than most realize. About 66% of caregivers are women. And being a caregiver may mean working part-time, giving up a promotion, or stopping work altogether for a period of time. A woman with a compensation of about $80,000 annually may think that giving up 2 years to care for her children, her parents, his parents, him, or someone else would cost about $160,000. However, think again. After considering other costs, it could equal as much as 8, 9, or 10 times that. If early in her career, and if you think about the fact that she could take a double-digit pay cut when she returns, she could also get her raises off that pay cut for the rest of her life. If she doesn't invest in that 401k or IRA while she's taking the time off, if she ends up with reduced monthly Social Security benefits as a result, and then losing the compounding. And then there's the kicker, the last one here, longevity. Yes, the good news is we're living longer, and the bad news is we're living longer. A woman turning 65 years old today can expect to live to age 87 on average, compared to 84 for men. Wealthier men and women do tend to live longer than this. So women need to prepare to be able to live financially for more years in retirement, because we do live longer and on average marry older men. Furthermore, healthcare costs, which are already rising, have a disproportionate impact on women because they live longer. And this creates challenges for women if they're not properly planned. So these are the 3 challenges that she's facing. So it makes it important for her to have those financial life planning conversations. After all, baby boomer women were raised in a culture where it was deemed inappropriate or unladylike to talk about your finances. To do so often would feel rude or base. However, it's important that she open up and determine the impacts and plan for such things as aging effects, losing a spouse, dependency, loss or reduction of income, health issues, and cost of health care. Now, another potential source of uneasiness that's frequently present with women in financial life planning conversations is the bag lady syndrome. Regardless of the value of her portfolio, most women, if asked if they were wealthy, would say no. In fact, so much so, a term has been coined for this, the bag lady syndrome. An often irrational fear of insecurity If you Google bag lady syndrome, you'll find about 5 pages of Google URLs on this. And I've never met or worked with a woman who has not felt some level of financial insecurity, wondering what would happen if she ended up destitute and on her own with no money. This concern is at all socioeconomic levels. After all, we've all seen it happen to wealthy celebrities where they've lost their money. Kim Basinger, Pamela Anderson, Toni Braxton, just to name a few of the women, not to mention the litany of men as well. The fact that women live longer on average than men makes it more understandable that they would worry more about this. Interestingly, a study we did involved surveying the private needs and desires of 1,000 breadwinner women. And it showed that it can be even psychologically harder on a woman in a breadwinner role. The study found that 40% of breadwinner women who participated in the study felt pressure to downplay their breadwinner status, reticent to bring attention to the fact that they made more than their spouse. 28% of married or civil partner breadwinner women thought that their parents disapproved of the fact that they were in a position where they were making more than their spouse. And 44% of all study participants dreamed of being a mom first and having a career second when they were little girls. In fact, the traditional divide and conquer approach to managing finances, where women typically take care of day-to-day expenses and men take care of long-term planning, was found to leave women ill-prepared to manage key financial needs during critical moments of their lives, like a divorce or the death of a partner. And interestingly, research shows that millennial women are more apt to take this traditional role. And that's a little surprising. Society is also holding on to old norms for men too. They express higher expectations for men than women when it comes to providing for the family. According to a Pew Research study, Americans feel that men should be able to support the family, but just don't hold women to that same standard. These traditional values, which are in accordance with what those women surveyed were feeling or noticing, don't seem to serve men or women well. Now, these customary social norms will continue to be revisited with the changes we're seeing in society. While women are the primary breadwinners in 40% of all families across the US, 95% of women will be the primary financial decision maker in their household at some point in their lives. Now, this could be for several reasons. It could be death of a spouse. It could be after they go through a divorce. It could be marriage delays, women getting married later in life, increased compensation, inheritance. But now that we know a bit more about women's increasing economic power, what does that mean for your practice today, for those of you who serve women, most of us? Women are incredibly relevant to advisory practices across the country. Through being more mindful of women, trusted advisors can serve new households, do a better job delighting and retaining current accounts, and even create stronger bonds with them and their families than what we see today. Women can be a wonderful gateway to the family. I found this to be an interesting quote. The biggest emerging market in the world today is not China, it's women. It just kind of underscores this hidden market that people aren't talking about as much as one might think, given the size of it. So women are an economic powerhouse. They currently control about half of US wealth today and will control 2/3 of the nation's wealth by 2030. And why? Well, this is why. Women have surpassed men in obtaining college degrees. Last year, women earned 57% of bachelor degrees, 60% of master's degrees, and about 51% of doctoral degrees. They're receiving greater compensation. While not on par with men yet, the gap is decreasing. They also enjoy greater employment participation. 70% of women with children under 18 are actively working, with 40% being the primary or only breadwinner in those cases. And they're achieving greater status. Women now hold 50% of all management and professional occupations. They're majority owners in 11.6 million businesses, which generate 1.7 trillion in revenues. And they have greater purchasing power. Their increased earning potential has enabled them to contribute more to household income, either directly or indirectly, making about 85% of consumer purchases. And then greater inheritance. 70% of inheritance from baby boomer parents is expected to go to their daughters. And greater longevity. Just outliving a male spouse with a shorter life can make a woman the primary decision maker in the household. And then finally, the greater influence. All of this factors into that. Now this term center of the circle is something that I heard from someone named Dan Snyder. He's the director of personal financial planning division of the AICPA. He kind of stuck with me. He asked me to share a similar message as what I'm sharing today at their Sophisticated Tax Planning for Wealthy Clients conference in Philadelphia about a year ago. He wanted me to convey the opportunity that exists while reminding attendees that to be the most trusted advisor, you must be in the center of the circle with your clients. To him, being in the center of the circle means being the one who knows the client best, coming up with creative ideas and proactively engaging other people who could help her. His message was that CPAs who are just responsive, accurate, and dependable are not enough. You must understand her and her issues well enough to come up with proactive suggestions on ways to help her. Unfortunately, 67% of women feel misunderstood by their financial advisors. 62% would switch their advisor today, and 70% would change advisors within 1 year of death of their partner. So how do we avoid becoming cliche and falling into the stereotypical behaviors? Well, we get to know her better, what's on her mind as it relates to financial services. Her often perceived challenges and concerns in achieving and maintaining her desired lifestyle now and in retirement. So how can we improve that communication with her? We want to understand those challenges and desires she's facing, explore her relationship with money. That's a creative one that I know we have tried to do with different workshops. Defining her goals and assessing and mitigating her risks. And then putting some ideas to work. How do we act on all of this? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Different topics to talk about with her. The conversation is important for everyone. Everyone, we talked about it to begin with, retirement planning and saving shortfalls. It's critical across the board, but especially for her, for those reasons we mentioned with the gaps and compensation debt and the fact that she's living longer, she's often the caregiver. So many women often cite low confidence in our industry as a reason why she doesn't engage more with us. So she says that we often target all women with the same message or service. It's often a lack of appropriate financial advisor credentials and training, and it often feels like a selling platform and standardized approach. So we found that women are often skeptical at first, but we can certainly change that. And that's the nice thing about everything we're talking about today, from her challenges to challenges we have in serving her, they can all be amended. So now at this time, I want to pause just to invite you to participate in the dialogue by entering anything you want to in the question and answer. It doesn't have to be a question. Maybe you've got a comment, and you could include that there, and Greg will kindly share it as part of the conversation, or you can raise your hand and speak out, because I would love to enrich this conversation with all of our experiences. If you have some, if I say something that brings something to light or something you'd like to either add to or challenge, I'd love to have a good dialogue, just so we can make this very real, because we all have experiences with women, and the more that we can improve our conversations with her, the better off she will be with these challenges that she's facing.
Nothing so far, no brave souls yet.
Well, just feel free to chime in anytime. Thanks, Greg.
Yep, if you raise your hand, there you go. I got a hand raised. There you go, Sandy. And over by the computer, there you go.
Okay, so Paula, initially, by the way, thank you. I think this is a great topic and one that is not really shared a lot except for amongst women. You initially said that, I think you said something to this effect about the negotiation skills that a woman needs to have when dealing with anybody, whether it's men or women. Could you address the differences maybe that women have to learn compared to the other, somebody else?
Oh, that is an excellent question. But when I was referring to that, that was one of about, I'd say, 60 different sessions that were offered at the NCACPA Women's Conference. So I am not credible in terms of speaking about specific strategies on that other than just my own experiences. So I don't feel like I am qualified to speak to that. That's a great question, but just that's not something that I want to hold myself out as an expert in.
Okay, thank you.
But we can dialogue about it. Are you saying maybe as a group, maybe brainstorm some ways to better negotiate? Is that what you're?
Well, I just wondered what other people thought about negotiation skills, women and men.
Oh.
If it was even out there, I think women are softer.
Oh,
and
yes.
They have to be hard.
Oh, yes. Okay. That is a good point. And I'm going to be documenting some of this for maybe future things that we can, sessions that we can have in a subsection group or something too. So I will capture that. That's a good one to explore deeper. So in building these conversations.
Hey, Paula, before you go on, we do have one question, which I think is appropriate. As a male, how do you listen intently and not come off as a charlatan, or perhaps condescending?
I, for one, anytime a male is listening to me, I've never felt that it was condescending. I love for people to listen to me. And then if you repeat back what I've said, then I especially appreciate that because you are especially careful if I'm trying to convey something. So I don't think that you, that's a very good question, but I think it's just mainly listening and repeating back what they said, just acknowledging them. That's great that they're doing that. That might be a personal one to talk about too, if that's something that they're seeing in their environment, some challenges with that to explore on a more detailed level. That's another good point. I don't know how many of you saw this movie, What Women Want, but basically Mel Gibson was trapped in Helen Hunt's head, and he could hear everything that she said, or everything that she was thinking, and he was just surprised and learned a tremendous amount. And I thought, wow, what a great power that would be to have that in the opposite sex, to kind of learn a lot. Because that's what we're trying to think about here. We want to be authentic, have an authentic and holistic relationship, know all about me, my family, friends, and philanthropies. So like to that person, that last person's question, sometimes just it surprises a woman if a man listens very intently and for a long time. Because I know like even in they say that those studies that say women say 3,000 more words than a man a day, they say that that is not true. That is proven to be untrue, that was said kind of on a lark and there was no research behind it. But it really feels like it's true. And I know my husband would say, I have to cut it off at a certain time because he's just had enough talking. So to that person's point, just the fact that he's listening to a woman, I think that's, I don't know if other women on the call would agree with me, but that is very much appreciated. Just going into those more details. And just being more, talking about values, political orientation sometimes, risk tolerance, long-term focus, not being transactional. That's one of those things that you can really just tell if someone's being genuine or not. And it's hard to put your finger on, but we all know it when someone's not. Women want to be understood. They want planning tailored to them without wasting their time. So that's where listening is important, really tuning in, and that's not just verbal listening. I guess it's everything. If they're a person that wants to have that quick conversation, you have to stay in step with them, or if there's someone that wants to be more exploratory, you stay in step with them there too. Because not wasting their time is key too. Can be challenging. But basically they have a lot to understand and they don't know where to start. So you'll find that sometimes with women, probably everyone has, not to be condescending because we've all had these conversations, but you don't want to overwhelm her because women are more geared toward education. They want to educate themselves, and sometimes more than many people would feel is necessary because it holds them back from making a decision. So you have to be, and I think that's where a lot of the nuances in our industry, you want to educate them, but you don't want to over-educate them or take them down roads that are too detail oriented that may not matter as much. So you really kind of have to pick those areas, because that's what women are looking for when it comes to financial topics. They want to be armed with information so they feel empowered to make wise decisions about their money and career. They want to strengthen their skills, but again, just not always sure where to begin because there's a lot to know. They don't want products. They want strategies and tactics that will enable them to accomplish their goals. Women have a longer term view and are just a bit more conservative and deliberate, which tends to pay off in the long term. They're not chasing performance, but they're more thinking about the total portfolio, not what happens in the next month or year. And all the data seems to show that those types of investors win, that women tend to be okay with writing out the long-term diversification. So a lot of it's in just giving them confidence to, move forward, because they're not going to move around a lot. They'll make a well thought out decision, and they're not going to, flip on it a whole lot typically. So too many investors just think there's an automatic tie between your age, time horizon, and risk tolerance. However, if you're going to panic and sell, it doesn't matter at what age you are. So it is important that she is educated so she has a successful experience when she does start investing. And she gets completely turned off maybe by someone who would get in front of a room and wants to sound like the smartest person in the room by using a lot of jargon and language that people don't understand, just throwing the lingo out. It's funny, I know the Wall Street Journal at one time went down to 8th grade reading level, and I'd read since that they went down to a 5th grade reading level. So you really want to try to explain things in terms that maybe a 13 or 14-year-old can understand. And I've even practiced on my son, like explaining some things to him. He's 14, just to see if I'm explaining it in a way that really travels, that makes the right connections and metaphors so that it's easily interpreted. And then communicating clearly and intelligently. In software circles, software engineers have a method of debugging. It's called rubber duck debugging. And it really is, you can look it up on Wikipedia. Basically, the designer carries around a rubber duck and explains all the coding steps in detail to this rubber duck, forcing them to explain it line by line to the duck. And it helps them, going through this exercise, helps them actually break it down to be able to find out where they may have made a mistake, or some area that they can get deeper understanding in, so that they don't have to kind of bother a human person. So maybe taking this approach to breaking down steps can be helpful in making the complex simple. You want to be direct, talk to her, but don't talk down to her, realizing any lack of knowledge has more to do with interest level, time constraints, and more, as opposed to her ability. That, of course, would be insulting to anyone to think that. There have been people who said that women aren't as good at math for some reason. But, there's women and men are both good at math and can both be good at investing. So you never want her to think that you're questioning her ability. Just, everyone gets busy or maybe not as interested. And then help her collaborate with her other advisors. These are things that come out of studies that women have said. Tax planning strategies, they're looking for those. They want an understanding of their company's health care, insurance, and benefit plans. They want to discuss their options so they can make informed decisions. That gets back to the education, no substitute for that. And women tend to be better investors than men that's really anecdotal somewhat. We don't have any hard concrete facts on this, but the reason they say that is because women tend to be longer term focused. They rely a little bit more on intuition, where men tend have that said they tend to be more like gamblers with a bit more of a short-term horizon, and kind of just looking at the market more like a game, you know, going after the returns. Again, this is more anecdotal. This is what is widely said, just conveying that. And it's increasingly important for women to be engaged in wealth transfer, as men have been for a longer period of time. The differences emotionally in men versus women can serve women very well. So because they don't typically make those knee-jerk reactions that can come with, that can come sometimes. Basically, you know, we're just blessed that we have more information at our fingertips today, because she has a lot of resources and information and education that's out there. But again, you do have to be careful because there's a lot of ease of access to that information, and again, not to get overwhelmed. But it's great that even companies are able to give employees a more sophisticated approach to managing their money that she would have access to through her employers. But it's still daunting, especially for young people. Now, in defining her goals, I chose this photo because this is really what her goals are like, if you think about it, because women have a very broad view about true wealth. Most believe other factors in addition to finances define real wealth. They have goals that involve everybody in their family, from their spouses to their children to their grandchildren. They're really thinking more about their goals than they are about returns when it comes to basically wealth planning or financial life planning. And as they grow older, they're more concerned about giving back to the community and passing the right values on to their children and grandchildren. Most don't have a goal of accumulating money just for the sake of making money. It's more important to be able to achieve their goals, to enjoy the different aspects of life, family, careers, and relationships. We'll go back to the fears more. You know, as an advisor and financial life planner, I receive a lot of questions from women, you know, like, will I be able to keep living the way I'm living through retirement? Should I buy the beach home or an RV? Should I set up a donor advised fund? Should I do a Roth conversion? How much will college cost? What's a QCD? What do you think about long-term care insurance? But the essence of all these questions really are these two questions. Will I run out of money? Will I be able to afford my health care and long-term care costs in the future when it comes to women? These are kind of their two key questions in my estimation. Of course, they're rarely asked in this direct way. However, these questions seem to be at the genesis of most others. Now, these are heavy questions. If posed and left to one's imagination, they're very heavy questions. They can be overwhelming. However, through a written financial life plan, they're addressed in a logical way with contingency planning to boot. A financial plan is just a roadmap to financial independence, a roadmap to her goals. It's everything financial in her life summarized in one place. You look at her assets, liabilities, income, expenses, and related assumptions to discern whether it looks like she will have assets throughout her life or deplete them along the way. And if depletion does look likely, you can look at different ways to address the shortfall now to get her back on track. And any of us that do this financial life planning, that's the key thing now. You always have more levers. My husband calls it more windows. Earlier in your life, you have more windows open and they're closing as you move along in your life in many cases. And that really is what financial life planning is about. The sooner that someone can get in and figure out they may have a shortfall, the sooner they can do something about it. And you can, and most times you can do something about it. So it's not something to be afraid of, but something to empower her with so that she can feel better, have more peace of mind, sleep better at night. So again, if depletion looks likely, you can address the shortfall to get her back on track. You can also find more efficient, tax-advantaged ways of doing things, ways to lower her risk through accomplishing goals throughout the process of the planning. The financial life plan is basically the best way to make that vision of herself as a bag lady go away and bring her peace of mind. So how does she answer those questions? Will I run out of money? Will I be able to afford my health care and long-term care costs in the future? Her written comprehensive financial plan answers them. As we all know, you can't do these things on the back of an envelope anymore. You have to look at inflation, taxes, market returns. It can be pretty in-depth. So after exploring her goals, these are risks to meeting, there are risks to meeting her life goals and having the retirement that she desires. And you can think of them in these 4 buckets. It's a big part of bringing that peace of mind to her, is exploring these risks: financial, personal, health and housing, and public. We'll spend just a moment on each, but as a side note, I would not share this big checklist I'm about to share with you with her, because it would likely seem daunting. However, I believe this list of risks serves as a helpful platform to highlight a few that would be more important to her, with some points that I would make specific to women. So let's start with financial. Inflation risk and interest rate risk are something everyone's talking about now. We really could have both of those, or inflation risk, especially with all of the debt. People want to have conversations around that. However, there's not much she can do about that in terms of planning. So you want to focus more on the controllable as opposed to the non-controllable, and talk to her more about the top risk, business career risk, and maybe stock market risk to calm her. So for business and career risk, just making sure that she is not going to be, her career is not going to be obsolete, or she's adding on to her skill sets to make her more valuable, because she may be working longer, because she's living longer. But I want to talk to you about stock market risk for a moment, because in this case, that may be keeping her from investing. So one chart that I particularly like is this one. It's put out by JP Morgan, and this shows you 40 years of returns, and the gray bars show you where the returns end up at the end of the year. And you notice here that in 30 of the 40 years, we ended up positive. So there were positive returns at the end of the year. However, in order to achieve and enjoy those positive returns, you had to take part in the negative returns, and you'll see those lows listed there in red. So you had to watch your portfolio go all the way down to these lows that you see without jumping out. And so that's important. This is a great chart to include when you talk to women, because of their being risk averse sometimes, just to kind of set the table so that they are aware of it. They know that market downturns are natural, and to just stay with it, because they're going to have more positive years than they have negative. This is another important thing to share with her and any of your clients. Sequencing risk. A lot of times in financial plans, we'll talk about, averaging on a 7% return for a diversified portfolio, about 60-40 portfolio over a 20-year period. Well, it depends on when those returns happen. So at the bottom of the page, you see the average 7.16% for this example first person, and an example second person also got 7.16% returns. However, if you look at the balance column, the first person didn't turn out as well. 20 years down the road, they have $107,000 in their portfolio, whereas the second one had 1.5 million. And the differential is because of when those returns were realized. So the first person, they got hit with a lot of negative years up front, which eroded their portfolio, whereas the second person, those negative returns came later in the year. So this is something good to share with clients that are even sometimes not as careful with their risks, just to remind them that, you could have some bad years, your first years out of the gate in retirement, that could really make things more challenging for you. And it's a good conversation around guardrails that will help the woman feel a little bit more control, to say, if returns go down, you just eat a little bit more chicken in those years than if you've got good returns where you eat steak, to kind of offset some of the bad years or down years. And then the personal risks. The death of spouse and marital status changes. If you haven't if you're servicing clients and you haven't read books on these, I would encourage you to, because these are so important. When someone's going through the death of a spouse or a divorce, they're just a different person, and you're going to have a harder time relating to them if you don't know some key things. For instance, I did not even realize at one point that if I told a widow that she looked great today, that can actually make her angry. Or if I said, you have a busier social calendar than me, you're never home, that can make her angry. So these are things that you may not normally realize. You think you're encouraging them, but it's actually working the opposite way. So there are just nuances I would encourage you to look into. And I did do the series for the AICPA where I did an extensive study on those, and those different life changes. And I have a URL for that later in here if you want to play back some of those to give you little insights. And then longevity risk, we've talked about that, how that's really key to her. Because you can see here that our longevity is increasing, and it's going to continue to increase. Someone from MIT said that we are now living to, the person that's going to live to age 130 has been born. So, you know, it's only going to continue to increase. Interestingly, you see the first line there, 1935, that is when Social Security came out. And that is when age 65 was established for the payout time. And at that time, the average life expectancy was 61. So of course, they didn't think Social Security was going to be a very expensive program. It was more a political ploy. But you see, we didn't change well, we could have changed a lot of things, but for one, the age on Social Security, as most of us know, is 65, 66, and 67 for those living now, depending on year of birth. But you know, we still haven't changed the underlying system, and we're living longer. So you can see how we were living average of 62 years back in 1935, and now in 2019, 81 years. So it's just important to keep in mind. And we've added a full decade onto lifespan since the 1960s. So again, just in a short period of time. And we have to plan. And another part of longevity risk in protecting against it is just diversification. Every asset class has its day. This is what you see here is a very colorful quilt. Each of these asset classes, we have about 9 asset classes here. If you look vertically by year, you see that different asset classes did better in certain years than others. They were, the better performing ones are on top, the worst performing ones are on bottom. So if you were loyal to one asset class, you were not going to do as well as if you're in a diversified portfolio. If you look at the whitish grayish box that says asset allocation, that's very close to a 60-40 portfolio. And you can see it kind of cuts through the waves, and over time typically does better than if you invest in just one or a few asset classes. So again, another helpful chart to show new investors so they understand how important diversification is. And this just complements that to say that some assets grow faster than others, but there's more risk associated with some than others. So it's risk, we have to look at risk-related returns. And then health and housing. There are challenges there as well. But right now we're going to talk about some of those unexpected medical bills and how 91% of people surveyed believed long-term care planning is an important component of retirement planning, but only half have actually addressed the need with their partner, spouse, or family members. This is really hard for people to kind of think about, but Medicare does not cover long-term care. So you definitely need to be having those discussions, especially with women. And then finally, talk a little bit about Social Security and Medicare reduction risks. All right, this article for the tax advisor on the top 7 mistakes when claiming Social Security benefits. But for her, some things to keep in mind with Social Security are that just to make sure that the household is looking at it as a household decisions. So many times I'll have a male client that, you know, he's ready to take Social Security earlier. You know, the average male takes it at 62 or 63. In many cases, it's better, in most cases, to defer it, even past your full retirement age. But if you don't kind of stop them and have that conversation, they might not realize this. Did you have something to say, Greg? No, okay. They may not realize that there's a survivor's benefit, that one of those two benefits will go away when the first in the couple dies, and they will be left with the higher benefit of the two. So this is very important in planning for her, because she most likely will be the one that will outlive him. So one of those will go away. So you're going to want the one that stays to be as high as it can. So there's a lot to think about here. But I really appreciate, there are a lot of men that really just want to learn about these challenges of women, because they realize this with their wives, with their mothers, their sisters, and they know this is the best way to protect them, to see it coming and have these conversations. And I always say the best way to help them is to include them in the meetings. It's really sad when someone loses their husband and now they're faced with trying to figure out all the financial aspects, or going through a divorce, how your income or your assets are all cut in half, and now you have to figure out how to manage everything. So you don't want to be trying to fix the airplane while it's in the air. So in planning to help ensure that she will not become a bag lady, we talked about the financial plan. That's probably the key way. And then knowing that her assets will keep pace with inflation and taxes. You cannot do that on the back of an envelope. You really have to have some sophisticated analysis to factor in all the things that should be factored in to knowing whether she'll be okay. And then knowing how much to save and how much to spend, being able to reinvent herself if she needs to do so, and being able to care for herself later in life. So in answering these questions, the financial plan is the best way to do it. We've talked about some of these key areas that are probably most interesting to her, most relevant to her. ESG investing over here is one I'd like to point out. That is environmental, social, and governmental investing. Everything that seems like it's coming out today about that's like the hottest topic, says that women are just taking the lead in this, because a lot of women want to put their money in investing where their values are. And so this just is basically drawing a line in the sand and saying, I want to invest my money in things that are helpful to the future, to my children and my children's children. And so it's kind of just raising the bar on how companies are, how they impact the environment, social issues, and the government. So regulations. So that's a really an important area to women. If you know very little about that, please brush up on it, because you will get those questions. And it really, getting back to being the center of the circle, that's probably a conversation that you should be leading. And college funding, there's a lot that can be said about that. And probably the most important point about college funding, other than just 529s are great, start them as soon as possible, is that you really want to pick the right opportunity that manages the costs of it, as opposed to how can I save as much money as I can for college. It's more about how can I choose the most effective option for college, so that I'm not spending money where it doesn't make sense. If my child wants to be in this profession, it doesn't pay very much and it doesn't require an Ivy League education, maybe this other path would be more fitting for their future income. So just being thoughtful with that. And there are a lot of other topics we could talk about, but we want to be mindful of the softer side. There's a great book on how to make better decisions. So helping your clients with that, there's a book called Decisive by the Heath brothers that talks about a RAP process, which actually helps discipline you to come up with more options, so you'll make better decisions. Sometimes our process of decision making short circuits some great ideas that could come into play. And so you can create models that will help your brain kind of open up to more possibilities, so that you have better outcomes. Motivation, this is about helping her know her why Why did she get up in the morning? What gets her out of bed on that cold day? Because that ultimately should be at the root of all of her goals. And if it's not, then her goals may be misplaced or they're not going to be motivating enough. And then wellness, is she just trying to not get sick, or is she focusing on the best life that she can have, on making herself very healthy? Socialization, trimming that friendship garden. So, or tending it, I guess I should say. We all have friends that might move away, might pass away, might somehow no longer be good for us if they're making us worried about a lot of things needlessly. They're just always, you always need to reevaluate that, especially as we get older, because it's very important to have a rich garden of friends. And so if you find yourself losing a lot of friends for whatever reason, just going out there and nurturing that friendship garden. And then communication is so important in keeping us sharp and helping us learn and keeping us in the game. So in putting the ideas to work, encouraging her to connect proactively, communicate comfortably, coordinating with other professionals, and cultivating through education. These are some of the key ideas. If we're putting all of this into place and we realize that this is more than just financial planning, this is financial life planning, it will be an enriching experience for her that she will not only, it will be a little bit of work, but she will enjoy and feel like she's becoming stronger through it. This is the podcast series that I put together that talks a little bit about breadwinner women, divorced women, and widows. If you're interested, there are some bit.ly links to it if you want to check them out. And this presentation Greg will be giving you as well. But basically, there is a sea of faces out there, with each one different from the last. The more we can learn about people and their challenges, the more effective we can be in helping them impart the real lasting change they desire. We're not going to connect with them unless we are in their world, talking about things that are interesting to them, starting with the emotion. Because it's not what you say, but how you say it. Everyone appreciates the person who can make the complex simple. And after all, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. We started out today with me relaying a story to you about work lunches with colleagues when I was just out of school. The sports play-by-plays, golf stories, and such seemed like a different language and at times made it a little challenging for me to connect. I made an effort by following some teams and investing in some clubs. I'm sure you've had similar experiences. However, today we have used the woman in general as that person who may be feeling left out of the conversation. Maybe she's your mother, your aunt, your sister, your colleague, or maybe she's a good friend. Everyone on this call has more financial knowledge than the average bear. What are you doing to speak her language and engage her in these types of conversations? Unfortunately, we don't do it very much as a society. Like I mentioned with the baby boomer woman, so often these conversations just seem crass. However, if you're able to figure out a way to come together with family and friends safely over a dinner table to celebrate Thanksgiving during COVID, think about how these people who are so dear to you are being nurtured. You have served them a warm, filling meal and had good fellowship, but what do you know about them, and in particular her, for the reasons that we've discussed, and their financial security? Knowing that the earlier that you plan, the more options are available to her to be able to get on a great path to build and grow her financial independence. Maybe becoming a better conversationalist is more important than you might think. Thank you for joining me today for Taking the Reins, Financial Influence on the Move.